Hey Megan.
Hi, Steve. How's it going?
I'm well. How you doing? We're live on Zoom and on YouTube.
Fantastic.
Just a heads up. I'm well. How are you?
Good. Do you want me to go ahead and record this as well?
Yes. All the recordings. Oh,
Oh.
oh,
Hey,
oh,
there we are again.
whoa, whoa. Just close that. Um, am I so okay, so it's recorded on my side, but I think it's gonna go up to the cloud. So if you can record as well, if it and I'm gonna enable you here. How do I make you a co-host? It says it only will let me change host, so I don't
Okay.
necessarily want to do that. But I think I'll be able to. If I have any issues with I'll be able to like mute people and whatnot.
Okay.
Actually, let me now share my screen. So what am I doing here? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Presents. Over here. Hmm. There you go. I just goes. Folks coming on in. Aisha, Natasha, and Mauna, so good to see you guys. The coolest couple in the world, in my opinion. So I'm just going to give folks a couple minutes to filter in. Um, yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Seems like folks have filtered in. I hope that you've been enjoying the content so far. Thank you for setting aside the time to join us, and especially for coming to this room for this discussion. So for today, I'm going to be talking about the topic of food sovereignty and exploring the history of prejudice in the food supply chain. Like I said, we're just going to be going over some syntax, and then at the end, put aside some time to just to chat and see how this plays out in your communities. And Megan, shout out to Megan, who's in the room as researcher, note taker. Megan, please feel free to chime in when I'm approaching around the 35-minute mark. Hopefully it won't get to that, but I definitely want to set aside some time for folks to talk a little bit. So today we're going to talk about language and why it's so important, food sovereignty versus food security, food desert versus food apartheid, why we lean towards one terminology versus another. We're also going to talk, shout out some folks who are combating land access issues, Leah Penniman at Soulfire Farms and Duran Chavis, an urban farmer. And then lastly, we're going to touch upon the food supply chain workforce, talk about how COVID pandemic has affected the health and security of this workforce, most particularly meat processing workers have really been affected and mistreated throughout this pandemic. But first, we're going to talk about, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Steve Coupe. I go on Instagram as 2Chef Coupe. I am part chef and part technologist. I became obsessed with the technique of cooking about 10 years ago. I merged this love of cooking with my Haitian upbringing to land on this passion of food resilience. In Haitian culture, we waste nothing. I took a hiatus from my technology career to cook full time. I worked in restaurants and for large catering companies. I hosted pop-up dinners in different cities. I conducted, I presented recipe classes at farmers markets and ran a public summer camp kitchen in upstate New York. I joined Charles's Patreon community in April 2020 at the height of, or at the start of the pandemic, at the start of quarantine. Our other room keeper, Megan, our researcher and note taker, Megan and I have been working on this presentation for some time now, going back and forth. So thank you, Megan. Megan became interested in food education and activism while farming in Alaska for several summers. Megan grew cabbage and carrots. She says that Alaska is known for huge cabbage. I didn't know that. And then back here on the mainland US, Megan spent 3 years as a farmers market and food hub manager, building infrastructure and community engagement with local food systems. What that means is that Megan did consumer education, educated customers, connected chefs with suppliers, with farmers, and also petitioned restaurants to highlight local foods on their menus. Restaurants are at the forefront of this kind of marketing. When someone goes out and eats something great or a really unusual ingredient and learns that it's local, they then go out and search for it themselves. So that's like a really critical junction in that space. Megan joined Charles's Patreon community in July 2019, and she's passionate about supporting small and beginning farmers and making fresh and local food available to everyone. So now let us start, let us learn stuff. So food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their lifestyle. This word came around in the 90s, and this term food security, it was great for naming an issue that was happening and naming, or more so naming the destination that we wanted to get to. As time goes on, we wanted to find a more robust term to describe this kind of destination point. And so we land upon food sovereignty. Food sovereignty goes a step beyond food security to include how to give the consumer a right to choose how their food is grown and sourced. So food sovereignty is not, I just go to Whole Foods and I take this and it's, it's a pretty vegetable and it's organic. Food sovereignty is you have options about where your food comes from, maybe what community grows it, and what practices are used when growing your food and what impact your food has upon the earth. All of these concepts fall under the umbrella of food sovereignty. Like the harmony of food sovereignty exists when we have security, safety, and a safe supply chain. We discuss security. Safety is the availability of safe and nutritious food choices, food without contaminants. You can have a pretty organic vegetable, but then it's sprayed with, something, a contaminant. And supply chain, control over how your food is produced. So food sovereignty is the harmony of these three concepts. So why is language so important? Why this hang up over this word versus that word, if we're all just trying to reach the same goal? Words mean things. For example, in a recipe, if I tell you to, you want to make a soft boiled egg with that is set on the outside where the whites are set and cooked, but the yellow yolk is still runny. And I tell you to simmer it gently for 7 minutes. And you're like, well, he said simmer, but I'm going to boil it because bubbles and water and both mean the same thing. You're going to come out with a different product. Words mean things. Another critical example is ingredient lists. If something has the word extract in it, and the most obvious example is corn. High fructose corn syrup is not the same thing as fresh corn. So if you're looking at an ingredient list and you see corn extract, that is different. Words mean things. So in other words, language is political and language is power, especially in the context of how we view one another. For anyone alive in 2021, I don't need to explain to you how words and language affect how people see other. It's very, very, very powerful. Language is political and language has power. So therefore, it is critical to be intentional with our words and phrases that we use, because these definitions have a real impact on the way that people view issues, approach policies, and prioritize solutions. So what is a food desert? Food desert is a space where residents have low access to healthy food source. Food desert is defined as 1 mile within an urban area, 10 miles in a rural area. Even that 10-mile point implies that you have a vehicle. I know, maybe you're biking, I guess. And that's what a food desert is when you live in a space that you don't have access to fresh, you don't have consistent access to fresh, healthy, and nutritious food. Once again, this term food desert was great at naming an issue that was happening in marginalized communities. But over time, we evolved to realize a couple shortfalls with this term food desert. So food desert implies that this lack of fresh, affordable food is just like a phenomenon. It's just a geographic problem, as if food can't exist within a food desert. And it's not true. Food deserts are the result of human intervention. Food deserts are a systemic problem. But the word food desert, it's a bit objective in syntax. It removes a human element from it and makes it a bit, laboratory or scientific, if you will. And just the word desert itself makes these communities sound bleak. When you think of desert, you think of the big rolling hay dust ball or whatever. When these communities are really filled with life, teeming with life, culture, and people, and resilience, and these folks make do, but it's with less resource. Some communities have resources invested in them and are allowed to thrive, and other communities will still thrive, but they have to invest their own resources without external support, and B, just put in a lot more to reach the same destination as other communities that happen to be more privileged. So that's food desert. So moving on from that, we've evolved to use the word food apartheid. Food apartheid includes the definition of food desert, but acknowledges that this is a system of intentional inequity. The word apartheid is a very, very strong word. Apartheid is a policy or system of segregation or discrimination based on the grounds of race. Apartheid was a real life political system that occurred in South Africa from the late 1940s to the 1990s. Apartheid is an Afrikaans word, which means apart, I believe. And the effects of apartheids have the effect of perpetuating unequal access to resources and networks. Once again, some communities get to grow and thrive, other communities get starved out. Once again, being starved out doesn't mean that it's all zombies walking around. These communities still make do because resilience is in their culture. So how does this happen, food apartheid? This is the result of real life policies. In the US, Black Americans are twice as likely to be food insecure than white non-Hispanic households. This was the result of a policy called redlining. Redlining is a term coined in the 1960s in the United States to describe how the federal government and its lenders would put a map on a table and take out a red pen, and they wanted to decide where they wanted to invest their money, which communities to invest in. So they took this red pen, drew circles around certain communities and said, we're not going to invest at all into the communities that are inside this red circle. So that's what redlining is. Just based on demographics, and Black inner city neighborhoods were most likely to be redlined. Redlining is a very official, almost legal term. If you do financial training, redlining is it's a really documented and codified and allegedly now illegal term. To redline, to choose a community and to divest from it simply for no reason. That's what redlining is. And redlining perpetuates food apartheids. So, tangent alert. I landed on another historically pivotal example of redlining. Like I said, the term came around in the 1960s to describe a specific phenomenon that was happening. But I noticed another example of redlining, the Berlin Conference. Now 135 years ago, Europeans met in Berlin, put a huge map of Africa on the wall. You'll see that in this caption, the map is 16 feet tall. And they started to split up Africa, draw lines and borders and assign each other land. The countries that were present at this conference, shout out to you if you're in Germany, Austria, Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, Spain, USA, France, UK, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Sweden, Norway, Ottoman Empire, everyone. Was met in a room, carved up Africa without regard to the communities that existed there, the trade routes that already existed there, and they assigned it to each other. And what was really interesting about this is that very few, if any, of these men had ever stepped foot in Africa. And the impact that they had is still felt today. Some of these countries today in Africa that exist were based on borders that these men arbitrarily drew. So that was really striking to me, to show that even though our words evolve over time, it's the pattern of behavior that's really existed for a long time and that we really have to get around. So land access. Before diving into the land access topic, I came across this quote on the website of the next person that I'm about to mention, and it really struck me. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. If you have land, with land, you can be healthy. And if you're healthy, you can do anything. And I think that's what Malcolm X is getting here about land being the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. It's not that, oh, I own land, so I am equal, but it's I own land, so therefore I can navigate in a different way. Because I'm connected to the system of Earth. If you become disconnected from the system of being tied to the Earth, you have to connect to another system to live, to resource yourself and to resource your descendants. But if you become disconnected from the system of Earth, that is the only physical system we have. When you become disconnected from the system of Earth, the other system that you have to plug into to fill that gap, it's going to be a non-tangible system. It's something you can't hold, and therefore it's something that's going to be inherently political. So Leah Penniman is an American farmer, educator, author, and food sovereignty activist at Soulfire Farms. Leah, after living in a rural food desert, I believe in rural Massachusetts or upstate New York, she had a newborn baby. And she didn't have consistent access to food. And she was also on government assistance at the time. So imagine you're with a newborn child. Government assistance money for food doesn't cover medicine or diapers, but maybe you've already figured that out. And now you have to access your food and you can't. And once again, remember 10 miles. So with your newborn, depending on the resources that you have, how do you strap your baby to your back and walk 10 miles to the supermarket? And if there was a supermarket 9 miles away, she wouldn't have been considered as living in a food desert. But after this, Leah realized the need for sovereignty in Black and Brown communities. In 2006, Leah Penniman purchased 72 acres of land. In 2011, opened up Soulfire Farm. So I want you to take note of this timeline. In 2006, she purchased the land. In 2011, she opened a farm, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. And Soulfire Farm describes themselves as an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm committed to uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system. Some of the food sovereignty programs that they run is Black Latinx Farmers Immersion, a 50-hour course to train beginner farmers. By 2018, 500 people had taken this course. They also run a subsidized farm food distribution program for people living under food apartheid. And they also just champion global organization towards equity in the food system. Their mission is to end racism and injustice in the food system, and by reclaiming the inherent life to belong to the earth and have agency in the food system as Black and brown people. And if you remember Charles mentioning in the intro keynote, belonging to the earth, we all have a right, or we all used to have a right to belong to the earth and claim space to the earth as people that come out of this earth. Leah has released a book, Farming While Black. In this book, you could learn about topics such as finding land and resources, writing a farm business plan, honoring the spirits of the land with planting and harvesting rituals. Once again, Charles mentioned, touched upon this topic of rituals. As Black and brown folks that were brought here against our will and separated from our ancestors physically and in culture, I feel that we've lost a lot of the rituals that are associated with the land. And it makes me happy to see Leah spending time in this book to honor spirits of the land and to talk about rituals. And even if these rituals that we develop today in relation to the land are not the same rituals that our ancestors had long ago, it's okay. We're allowed to evolve. And the goal of rituals is to, not make your basil grow faster, but it's to connect your humanity with the physicality of the earth that is fueling your humanity. So I think this is something that's really important, even though at first sight it may not seem so practical to spend time on rituals when you can spend time, turning the soil. Restoring degraded land is another topic that Leah touches upon in her book, Crop Planning for Vegetables, Fruits, and Herbs. Here I want to mention, remember that timeline. She bought the farm in 2006, opened it in 2011. It takes time to restore land. It's not an overnight process. It takes years. And crop planning is a seasonal, annual, multi-year effort and strategy. And it's not, you just throw down some seeds and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of mango trees and you're living good. Another topic that she touches upon in her book is movement building through education, direct action, and policy change. Really passing it forward. We're trying to pass forward a culture, and it really takes education from people from all walks of life. No matter who you are, you have the right to get acquainted with these theories and then turn them into a practice and educate others in your community. A quick fact from Leah's website: discrimination and violence against Black farmers has led to the decline in Black farmers. In 1920, Black farmers made up 14% of all growers. Today, they make up less than 2%. That's a big impact, and that's a multi-generational impact, and that equates to 14 million acres in lost land. So just to kind of think about that, even as recent as 1920s, there was this interest and push towards farming in the Black community, but through people and policies, it's declined. Remember, if you have land, you can have health, and if you have health, you can do anything. Duran Chavis. Duran Chavis is a regular person. He started his land activism career as a museum coordinator, and then it seems like through that he fell into the space of food activism. Chavis launched an open air farmers market targeting low-income communities in Richmond, Virginia. In 2012, they opened a community garden. This led to the development of urban farms, urban orchards, and urban vineyards. These programs accompanied initiatives in poverty mitigation, workforce development, health, and racial equity. And once again, spreading this knowledge to others that come after you, and really championing interest in the space is super important. Duran Chavis is currently championing RVA Land Justice Fund, which donates funding to farmers of color for land purchases in the Richmond region. So a couple really interesting quotes on Duran's website. As an urban farmer, one of the most tenacious issues I have faced has been that of land tenure, ownership. Finding places to grow has been hard work, often harder than the growth itself. After years of growing on land, I've seen landowners decide to change terms, sell property, or develop the urban farms into something else. People of African ancestries have to have the land that they control and to not have to worry about that being taken away. And even when Black farmers actually legally control land, there's been examples in US history of folks coming violently and stealing that land or driving them off that land. But to Chavis's comment about the urban farms growing into something else, imagine you have acquired a piece of land, you have restored the soil, and you are, after several years, you're growing these beautiful vegetables, and, someone buys a piece of land from the city or it gets reclaimed somehow, and they come and they're like, well, you got to go because, we need to build a Trader Joe's here, and there's a Starbucks across the street and the neighborhood's changing. It's terrible. And it's crazy that this is something that happens and continues to happen. And that's why the ownership of land is so important. It's not finding land and having the right to grow there, but it's owning it. Having the right to never have that land being taken away from you is super, super important. And another quote by Chavis: when we do work explaining why communities do not have access to healthy food, we tell this story about how certain communities were redlined, denied mortgages and financing based on race by the federal government. We tell the tale of how Black neighborhoods were destroyed by the creation of the interstate highway system. What he's referring to here is that in many cities, highways were created to connect wealthy suburbs with business districts, which were also invested in. And through construction, they just plowed, like literally and figuratively, through marginalized neighborhoods. In addition to the redlining, in addition to the divestment, so folks could get to and fro, but everyone underneath would get forgotten. So that's what he's referring to here. And he continues to say, we tell the story of how Black farmers were discriminated against and denied loans, and how their land was stolen by members of the white community operating on local and state levels across the country. We always explain that lack of food access is always about power and how systems were established to deny people of color theirs. And I love the last word, how he ends here, people of color of theirs, and it's of their rights, their privilege, their humanity, their culture, their fill in the blank. And back to what Charles had mentioned in the intro, this is an inherent right that we're meant to have, and that gets denied through politics. So now the last topic I'll touch upon, COVID-19 and the food supply chain workforce. This topic obviously is evolving. It's very, very modern and present topic. This doesn't have hundreds of years of data behind it, but once again, the patterns might have hundreds of years of data behind them. So research in farm workers in California, which is US's largest agricultural state, the research indicates that food workers are 3 times more likely to contract COVID than workers in other sectors. According to a prominent food workers union, at least 350 of its members have died from COVID, and 48,000 have been infected, 20,000 of which were meat processing workers, meat packing workers in the meat processing industry, and 17,000 grocery workers. And, grocery workers, I feel, have been, we all know them as essential workers. They've been in the headlines. We all clap for our essential workers. These meatpacking workers, I feel, were a little bit more forgotten. And if you think about COVID has presented itself. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Your meat supply chain has to keep continuing. You have products coming in that has expiration. And in addition, people are panic buying. So if anything, you probably have more pressure from your company and for the government to provide product. As an owner of someone in the space, like as a business owner, you would think it would be in your duty to really try to protect your workers. Workers in meat processing plants are especially vulnerable to COVID because they have to work in enclosed quarters, they have to work in these cold refrigerated spaces, and they have to work fast. So and so we talked about doctors and PPE kind of in the global discourse. As a business owner in this meat supply space, you would think the goal here would be to ramp up protection, to try to see how you can remain efficient, but also remain safe for these people that come in every day and risk their lives to provide profits for your organization. But instead, we end up with headlines like this. Managers at Tyson Meat Plant had a betting pool on how many workers would get COVID. This is a lawsuit. This is still in progress. Some people would tell you that the word alleges here is the most important word in the sentence. Others might disagree. But it shows you the mentality. These managers at the meat plants would come in, and usually they would be on the plant floor kind of running operations. But during COVID, there's anecdotes about them staying up in their offices, staying off the main floors, assigning tasks to their juniors, even if their juniors weren't qualified to be doing these managerial tasks. These managers knew the dangers of COVID, had to come to work anyway, but still mini quarantine themselves. And then in addition, they took it upon themselves to create a little betting pool to see how many of their subordinates would get COVID. There's a lot of information out there about this topic, especially in Civil Eats. Civil Eats is a publication that has articles about food resilience and food activism topics. So I definitely encourage you to learn more about this evolving topic. And actually, this is a topic that, when we talk about redlining and when we talk about the Berlin Conference, these are things that, it may feel really hard to change. It's like, well, I can't, this is a really global systemic problem. But this issue here of meat processing workers, it's still in flux. And, there are ways to help here if you want to contribute to the lawsuit funds, or if you're in the US, petition your legislators to just put attention on this topic. This is one of the topics that you can jump into today and have, maybe still a small impact, but a bigger impact than some of the other stuff that we've spoken about. So a few takeaways: redlining equals prejudice. Food sovereignty is a term that we want to gravitate towards versus food security. And food apartheid is another term that we want to use to really drive home not only what is happening, but how it's happening. And that is happening because of human intervention. It's not something that just occurs that we need to fix. It's something that we need to reverse. Leah Penniman, farmer activist at Soul Fire Farms, Duran Chavis, urban gardening activist at Land Justice Fund. So definitely check them out. Check out their websites. They definitely champion these topics that really need to be spoken about. And also meat processing workers. They are currently being oppressed during this pandemic. Literally, and the meat processing industry, I'm not sure was all rosy before pandemic. So I won't say that they weren't oppressed before pandemic, but they are now really in a rough situation. And this is something that we can all keep eyes on. So thank you, you all, for tuning in and for listening. And shout out to Megan again. Thank you for your help and guidance on this project. And so I want to invite you folks to kind of chime in. Have you seen these themes play out in your part of the world? What have the responses been? What does this sound like to you? Does this resonate with you at all?
Hi, my name is Michelle. I live in Seattle, Washington. I just became a part of this community about a week ago, and I was so excited to see the invite for this topic come in because this is the exact reason why I joined this group. I'm looking for more resources on this topic. So first, Steve, thank you. I live in Seattle. I've grown up here my whole life, but I live in a gentrifying community. And that's something that I'm participating in. I've lived in this community for about 8 years or so. So kind of was part of the root of the issue. And in Seattle this year, especially, we've had a lot of challenges with racial inequality. And so I felt the need to do my part and start learning about this, and especially how it impacts my direct neighbors, and how I can be a resource and a support for the groups that are working in my community. So I found a group that's called the Rainier Beach Action Coalition, and one of the projects they're working on is a food innovation center. So the city gifted them $2 million this year to purchase a building they've had their sights on for a few years. And they're working on transforming that into a place that's just right off of the light rail system, that's easily accessible, because much of our area is food apartheid. Sorry, I'm still learning how to use the new word. We used food desert in Seattle. But I'm definitely ready to bring the new language forward. So it's really, now they've been planning to get this building and now they have it. So how are we going to transform it and really ready to start putting programs into place, and working with the Black Farmers Network. And it's really exciting. So I'm just here to absorb everything.
Nice. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for sharing. And I think that concept you touched upon, landing in a community and realizing that you're part of the gentrification is, and this theme of gentrification, I think, usually has the backdrop of race applied to it. I think it is more a social status, economic issue. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, and congrats on being part of the movement to turn this space. And I think community engagement. There's people in your community that have been there for a long, long time, and it would be prudent to engage with them, and even get tips on how these initiatives have failed in the past, and just seeing how you and your crew can bounce back and make it even better. What's up, Katie?
Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the community. I think I just wanted to make one comment on your share, in that, using new words is always so scary. I get really scared about using new words, and am I going to fumble? Am I going to use it incorrectly? And I think just the practice of it is celebratory. We're using these inclusive words, we're using these informed words, and they may change. And I just wanted to give you kudos for trying it out.
On that note about using language, I saw something on Twitter yesterday about the difference between using the word activist and the word organizing. And I was wondering because I've not really heard that kind of discourse in the UK. I was wondering if anyone thinks there's a real power of changing from being activist to organizing, community building, things like that.
I have not heard about the nuances between the two stuff, but based on what you just said, I mean, like, the word activist, I think, just historically, there are people who make things difficult. Activists, stereotypically, like, they're loud. They, when you like, I think when you compare the word activist and organizer, and then say you have the word treason, activist seems closer to that kind of violent stuff. And activism does come in many forms. So just based off what you said, I would imagine that food organizer also sounds like a real job title, right? These are really official and resource intensive roles and initiatives. So food organizer to me sounds like a more palatable term to kind of get people to come into the space, rather like, oh, activism, nothing's wrong. Why, like, activist, like, and especially when you think of, like, at least here in the States, environmental activists, I think in the 70s maybe, just a lot of interesting tactics that different activists in different spaces have used to drive their points home. So I would imagine, but I have not heard about kind of the nuances between the two and that discussion.
I'll try and find the article and share it, because I wonder if it's going to be something that will come up a bit more.
Yeah. And so where kind of, in what space did you see this? Like what community were they talking about?
It was based in the States, and it was about activism being individualistic rather than organizing.
Yeah, that sounds true for real. Any other folks want to talk about how this kind of food sovereignty theme has played out in your communities? Where you know, where have you seen, or even when I spoke about communities being divested from, have you had communities in your part of the world that were like just a government treated them differently than other communities that were invested in?
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
No, you go first.
Okay. Well, we live in Denmark, and I'm gonna speak more about, I guess, Indonesia, where I'm originally from. I guess in Indonesia, it's really more like a class thing instead of like a race. So basically, it's all about if you can afford it or not. Like it's the same as like healthcare. So like how good you eat or how bad you eat depends on literally just like your money. So food sovereignty, I guess, would really depend on your income and where you are in like the hierarchy of class. It doesn't really I think it's also because, well, in Indonesia mostly it's more the same ethnicity, so it's really much more about class, I think. I don't know. What can you say anything about Denmark?
I'm struggling with the context right now.
Oh, just like food. What we've been talking about, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's also like a lot of these local farm, like there's a lot of these communities that like try to do organic, biodynamic farming, but it is extremely wealthy people who have these enclosed. And there are festivals for people who do like trash-free festivals, but all the people who attend to these festivals, they don't use trash in their everyday life because they go to all these fancy upper class shops. And so it's like kind of like enclosed activism also. Like they're trying to change some patterns in the society, but they don't really invite
That's true.
the people who aren't like as good as them in a sense.
Yeah, and I guess even in Denmark, it's still kind of like lucky because there is like this welfare system supposedly. So definitely, I think like all this kind of like activism or like this kind of stuff is really reserved for a lot of it is like white upper class.
Or students on government money who just like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely resonates and sounds familiar. Just like moving backwards, Magnus, what you mentioned about people going to these high-end festivals and just the resources to even travel to the festival and go there. So even if you don't use trash there, or if it's like all recycled stuff that you're using there, just you probably, you know, you might have flown first class to get there. I think Aisha, Natasha, you mentioned something interesting. Even in communities where everyone is the same background, ethnic-wise, like ethnicity-wise, people still find ways to kind of divide and class up. One thing is this topic of food security versus food sovereignty. If I am, you know, so there's a difference between rich and wealthy. So wealthy is what Magnus was mentioning, kind of running your own biodiversity greenhouse. Rich might be, I buy all of my food at Whole Foods. But even that, I may not have food sovereignty. I have a high level of food security, but Whole Foods decides how my food is grown and how my food is accessed. Before we go, Beatrice, I wanted to give you a chance to speak. It sounds like you're going to say something. I think we just have a couple more minutes left. I definitely want to hear your thoughts. 5 more minutes. Okay, great. Nice.
Hi, so I am from the Philippines, and thank you for this nice talk. So I don't know where to start because Philippines is very colonialized. So ever since I guess 400 years ago, we were colonized by Spain, then colonized by Americans, then Japanese, then Americans again. So from that history, um, when we were independent, when we got independent, they do not know who owns the land. So what happened is that the government loaned the land to farmers, but it's hard to know whose land it is now. So what happened to local farmers is that what the government did is to loan it to local farmers, to Philippine natives. So the government, I think it was on 70 years later, the farmers still did not own the land, even though they already farmed for the whole Philippines, and still there's no proper title who owns the land. While the Philippines rice prices keeps going up, and the whole Philippines is technically um, benefiting to their hard work, government still does not um, give them the claim that this is their land. And what is more political in it is that Filipino farmers do not really gain a lot of money farming. So, for example, a 1 kilo of rice here costs $1. If farmers only get 50 cents, so that's how hard it is. And also, speaking about fisheries, okay, Southeast Asia is full of fisheries here. Philippines do not have the proper claim with land because China right now is claiming our land. So China passed the law, I think a week ago, that if ever a Filipino crossed their land, even though it was not yet claimed that it is theirs, although it is in the Philippines territory, China claims that they will shoot any Filipinos. And Filipino government says, okay.
Yeah, I think it's
That's so
so
hard. That's so
it happens all
crazy.
over. I want to jump in because we have less than a minute
Mm,
left before we have to go back to
yeah, sure.
intermission. But thank you for that, Beatrice. And it's true. It's not, the farmers, if they own the land and they made more money off the rice, they can then expand their resources and focus on things like where the government is faltering. But when the government keeps their thumb on people like that, especially in this kind of rental situation or this loan situation, the farmers just they don't have the time and the space and the energy um, to kind of think about other things, think about activism. The government doesn't want you to be an activist, right? They want to keep things going. And that's why they have their thumbs on people like that. And the people working the land, you just can't. Once you have the baby in the rural area and you need to, go buy some food, but you live in a food desert. It's you just don't have the space to think about it. And so that's why we want to get to this destination of food sovereignty, so that we can have the space to just kind of enable our lives. It's not about feeding ourselves only. It's about enabling other areas in our life because we are healthy, because we have food sovereignty. So thank you, folks. Thank you all for joining. I invite you to jump back into the intermission room. I appreciate the energy and you spending your time with us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this UnConference. And shout out to Megan. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all. There's so much to go research now. I'm so excited.
Yes, you now have the language.